You can see the smoke from space. Indonesia is on fire. Since late August, vast swaths of forest and peatland are engulfed in flames, submerging hundreds of thousands of people in a haze of toxic smoke. Here's Greenpeace campaigner Yuyun Indrade in the hard-hit province of central Kalimantan.
The school is closed. Airport is not operate. Everything is just stopped. It's just like a time stop. This is it's like hell here. It's like inferno. It's very hard to breathe.
The environmental impact of the crisis is also severe. In a matter of weeks, the fires have released more carbon than entire countries produce in a year. And the fires are not accidental. They're man-made, intentionally set by palm companies looking to clear land for profit. The forests are burning to feed global demand for paper and palm oil. You will find palm oil everywhere around your house. It's in products like lipstick, dish detergent, and Oreo cookies. And according to Lindsay Allen, that makes you an accomplice in this catastrophe. Lindsay is the executive director of the Rainforest Action Network. She joins me now from San Francisco. Lindsay, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Lindsay, you were in northern Sumatra at the peak of these fires. Tell us what you experienced.
Well, to get to North Sumatra, you actually fly in through Medan, and you would be lucky to get a flight. So we were lucky to get in. Imagine landing in a place where the sky is darkened by the smoke, and the sun that is able to kind of barely get through this haze is very orange, and it almost looks apocalyptic. And folks have to wear rags and masks, thin paper masks, over their face because it is so challenging to breathe there.
Did you try to breathe the air?
Absolutely. You have no choice if you're in the region. And it's gotten so bad now that we know there's at least a handful of deaths from respiratory failure, mostly in children. Mm-hmm. We know that people from the hardest hit areas actually have to be evacuated with Indonesian warships at this point. Mm-hmm. It is very, very challenging for the people who have to stay there, and there's no immediate remedy.
And you've described that situation as a global scale environmental and human rights emergency. How high are the stakes for the people who are confronted with the situation?
The stakes are very high. I mean, we're talking about these are ecosystems that should never be burning. They are being intentionally set because companies want to clear land as quickly as possible. And we will all be left with the impacts of that very short-sighted need to make profit. We know that the emissions from these fires now exceed the emissions from the U.S. economy. We know that in a 3-week period, they exceeded the entire emissions for a year in Germany. We know that the level of respiratory threat to folks is there have been, thousands who have had to seek medical care, and the medical system is just inundated. Mm-hmm. And we know that these ecosystems, when they are not on fire, are some of our best defense because they actually store the carbon, pull the carbon down and store the carbon. We are in the lead up to Paris, which should be the largest convening internationally to figure out what are we going to do about climate change. And yet the fires that are raging throughout Indonesia and Malaysia is an underreported issue.
But these are industrial actions. These were actions that were taken by companies with the consent or with the implied consent of the Indonesian government. So it would be, some would argue, it's the Indonesian government's responsibility to deal with the problem. Why should we in the West be paying attention to what is really a domestic Indonesian situation?
It is absolutely the responsibility of the Indonesian government to, for instance, stop all development on peatlands, which are these types of forests that are going up in smoke. But I think it's shirking our responsibility if we fail to recognize that we are the ones consuming these products. So when I go to the grocery store, if I'm buying palm oil and not paying any attention, it means that I am putting money into the pockets of those who are intentionally lighting these fires. And in the globalized world we live in, we can no longer shirk responsibility for the way that our actions touch down.
Why is palm oil one of the substances that's connected to these fires?
So there are really two reasons why companies want to clear these forests as quickly as possible. They either want to replace these natural, lush tropical rainforests with tree plantations to make pulp, or they want to replace that to grow palm oil. And you can, if you take a flight over Borneo, you can literally fly for hours and all you see is these palm oil plantations. Those palm oil trees then produce the cheapest vegetable oil in the world. Roughly half of what is in your grocery store in the packaged food section includes this palm oil. And that also gives you a tremendous opportunity to take action and to tell companies that you think it's unacceptable for them to be using conflict palm oil in your food.
But we're talking about any number of products. Practically any food stuff that's made in an industrial process uses palm oil, and other household substances use it as well. So how do we create an effective course of action as consumers if we want our behavior to influence what's happening in Indonesia?
So one of the things that we've done is at Rainforest Action Network 2 years ago, we launched a campaign really focused on 20 of the largest global snack food companies. And we exposed the threats to their supply chain, essentially, by saying the palm oil you're buying is connected to human rights abuses when people are forced off their land. It's connected to climate change when these critical ecosystems release these carbon bombs when they're lit on fire. And it is connected to things like species extinction and the extinction of these rainforests. And many of the companies said, we're interested and we'd like to hear more, but our consumers just don't care. And so what we did was organize with consumers all across North America to demonstrate that consumers actually do want products that are not contributing to rainforest destruction, climate change, and human rights abuses. And the result is that some of the companies developed policies and chose to lead and worked to get an understanding of where the oil was coming from to make sure it was from good sources. Now, some of those leaders are Mars and Smuckers and General Mills and Kellogg's. And on the other hand, we have some companies that continue to ignore the problem, or they try to do as little as possible because they don't think that we as consumers care enough to make it worth their while to do something different. And so, because palm oil is so ubiquitous in each of our homes, it means we have a tremendous opportunity to influence what is going on, even though it's half a world away.
But we're still relying then on a Western-oriented boycott of a product that's being made in Indonesia with the consent of the Indonesian government. And it's a cheap product. So if the West does not buy it, then there's still going to be a market for it. Isn't it the Indonesian government that has to act on this?
Yeah, so I don't want to understate the importance of the Indonesian government acting. But I also want to be very clear that what we're calling for is not a boycott. We are calling for consumers to demand that if they are going to essentially vote with their pocketbooks, they are going to vote for companies who have taken responsibility for the conflict palm oil that we're seeing come out of Southeast Asia. There is a concerted effort where we can move companies to move sectors.
We have some idea of the scale of the problem based on the emissions alone. To what extent will these fires be on the agenda in Paris at the end of the month?
When the climate talks happen in Paris, the fires that are raging through Southeast Asia should be at the top of the agenda. What we will be looking for is that each country is taking responsibility, and at the same time, we will be watching to ensure that companies, which in many cases have economies bigger than countries, are also taking responsibility for their actions and not trying to displace blame.
Lindsay Allen, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you, Brent.
Lindsay Allen is the executive director of the Rainforest Action Network. We reached her in San Francisco.